This is The Balanced Dilemma. We tackle the often uniquely, but not always, female dilemma, managing life, work, family, and self. I'm Maura, Carlin.
And I'm Christie, Derrico. At The Balanced Dilemma, we speak with women and men to hear their balanced stories. Our guests are entrepreneurs, reinventors, creators, parents, and partners, telling us what we really want to know. How the heck did they manage that? And can you have it all and all at the same time?
Today's guest is Eve Rodsky. She's the author of Fair Play, a guide and plan to or more fairly allocate home and family responsibilities that more often than not fall on women. Topics we discuss a lot here on The Balanced Dilemma. Her newest book, Finding Your Unicorn Space, is about the need to find and nurture a creative outlet. We're guessing, though, that where Eve is now, career-wise and family-wise, isn't something she necessarily could predict. Raised by a single mother, she headed to college, attended Harvard Law School, after which she became a corporate attorney at a prestigious New York City law firm. She moved on to foundation advising at a bank before starting her own philanthropic advisory firm for high-wealth families and foundations. And that's where she was until a meltdown over blueberries. Eve, welcome to The Balanced Dilemma.
Thank you, Christie and Maura, for having me.
We've got to hear about the blueberries.
Definitely.
Well, can you imagine, before the pandemic, it was bad, but it's really, really bad now. But even back then, it was pretty bad. Same crap, different decade, I like to say. But anyway, blueberries breakdown happened to me on the side of the road 10 years ago. My husband, Seth, sent me a text that said, "I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries." And then that crying on the side of the road over being the fulfiller of his smoothie needs, while I was also having a breast pump and diaper bag on the passenger seat of my car, a client contract in my lap that I was trying to mark up, also while racing to get my toddler at the toddler transition program, which in America costs a family's entire salaries and lasts 7 minutes. That sense of overwhelm was what basically broke the camel's back. And in that moment, I realized something that was really hard to understand, which is that I did not have anything close to the career marriage combo that I thought I was going to have. And more importantly, I had become, over 10 years of marriage and 2 kids under 3, the default, or as I call in Fair Play, the she-fault, for literally every single household and domestic task for my family.
And that's something that many women can relate to. And we hear story after story about that. But before we go to that, let's start you back at the beginning. Tell us more about your upbringing with a single mom.
Did she give you any role model or something that you utilized in moving forward with your family life?
Well, it's a great question. Yes, she did. And I definitely did not expect Christie to be a gender division of labor specialist. That was not on my 3rd grade, what do you want to be when you grow up board at PS40. But what happened to me was I'm what psychologists call a parental child. And when you live in a household where you have a single parent, often one child steps up to take care of the house, to help with child care, all the gaps when that parent has to work. And that's what happened to me. And so from an early age, I saw my mother's life, how hard it was for her to do it all, that fallacy, with the guilt and shame that came with it for her wanting a bigger life, a bigger career, in addition to taking care of 2 young kids by herself. And that I'd say that whole time in my life was one that really informed a lot of my work now, that it's very, very hard for one person to do it all. The country, no safety nets to help them do it.
You mentioned in your book, and you pointed out that your mom, was a single mom, but she actually intentionally took on the financial burden herself by declining alimony. Beyond you being the child parent, did that have another impact on you?
Yes, of course. And actually, and I've never answered this question like that, so thank you for asking it. But I just actually testified on behalf of someone who reached out to me in a family court. because they were actually going through an issue around child support. And there's a Twitter that went viral this week about a woman asking her husband to pay her $60,000 to have her child. Why I say that is because we are in a country that doesn't value unpaid labor. And so my mother did not understand that at the time. And what she said is she hugely regretted not fighting for child support, because not only was she taking care of us financially, she was also doing all of the unpaid labor for our home. And over time, that really did burn her out.
Did that also make you more determined to be financially independent on your own?
100%. I think that anybody who goes through a situation like that, any minoritized population understands the barriers to building wealth, but also understands the opportunities. And for me, I've decided since 2016, I've decided that, my entire life will be committed to women's economic security. And in fact, when the blueberries breakdown had me crying on the side of the road, and I started to read every single article that had ever been written on the gendered division of labor, a.k.a. the mental load, a.k.a. invisible work, a.k.a. the second shift, what I slowly realized, like a Kaiser Soze moment, was that we are, ironically, if you care about women's economic security, the last frontier of feminism is ironically in the place closest to us, our homes. Everything that happens in our homes and the assumptions people make about what women do in our homes is the reasons why we have not even been close to reaching gender equality when it comes to wages or women in the C-suite.
Yeah, there's no doubt that's something that we've addressed here on the show, and gatekeeping that women engage in, but that has been the conclusion of many experts. I just want to ask you, did the issue with child support or alimony affect your relationship with your father? We've had fathers on this show, and there's no doubt they're the very important part of this equation. How did that factor into your relationship?
Well, it really affected my relationship because my father wasn't there growing up. If we got to go to KFC, there was a KFC on 14th Street and 2nd Avenue, and sometimes on Wednesday nights he would show up. But what was so strange was I had a lot of internalized misogyny, because I remember my father saying things like, your brother, he can't read, and how come you guys don't know how to ride a bike, and what's wrong? You don't even know how to tie your shoe. And so there was all this internalized misogyny because I was blaming my mother.
As if those were your mother's responsibilities.
Right, it was her responsibility.
So did you always know you wanted to be a lawyer? I mean, you went to law school, as did Christie and I.
Yes. I definitely always knew that justice was something that was really important to me. And that's very interesting for me to see a mother, again, who was struggling with financial responsibilities, also say, I'm not going to give up my life. And her life was committed to being a professor of social justice and social work at Hunter. And in her tenure, she also took on a lot of other justice work. One of them was saving our local YMHA. And so I watched a lot of that growing up, and I will say that I didn't know necessarily it would be through the law, but I knew that justice would definitely be a through line, as it was always one of my core values.
Had you always planned to have a family, and had you considered how those two would mesh?
Absolutely not. And I think...
Well, I say that because I went into litigation. I was a litigator for a long time, and even if somebody had told me in law school, not the best field if you think you might have a family, I wouldn't have listened.
Right. I wouldn't have listened either, but now I call myself the ghost of Christmas future, Maura. I'm here to talk to the people behind us, just like you are. I love your work. I love your and Christie work. You guys are doing really important things, talking about real life issues. And I will say that if you want to really know my real answer, it's in one sentence. I would say to those women who are in law school right now that you only have about 10 years left to live.
As a lawyer, they're coming from a recovering attorney, correct?
Yeah, I would say 10 years left to live, and every single thing that you thought your life was going to be, your dreams die at about 31.
Well, we're going to stop there and take a break. We'll be right back. This is The Balanced Dilemma. You're listening to The Balanced Dilemma. We're speaking with Eve Rodsky, the author of Fair Play and Finding Your Unicorn Space.
Eve, you decided at some point in time to leave the big law firm life. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, I think now if I look back, I would say, why would I have ever gone to a place that is inherently unequal? There's no other segment of the workforce that actually builds in inequity. And what I mean by that is if you're in the partner structure, you get a certain amount of privilege. If you want flexibility, you have to bleed for that flexibility and become something called of counsel. And I wish that I had known that there was a structure that inherently is biased against women and minoritized populations, because I never would have gone in the first place.
So you left that job, and what did you do next?
And by the way, when you left that job, had you already started your family?
Yes, I had not started my family at my law firm, but I was still practicing law at a financial services firm. And what I will say by that is that I did not, again, the surprise of trying to be pregnant, commute in 100-degree weather on 3 subways to get to the office, try to pretend that you're feeling well, not tell anybody because you're worried you will be biased against, lose your direct reports on maternity leave. So I will say that even though fair play and the idea for the blueberries breakdown didn't happen until I had opted out of the traditional workforce, which I did. I will never say the word opted out again. Now I say forced out. But back then I was still blaming myself. I will say that those seeds, how hard it was to succeed when I had been told I could do anything. I think it was the fact that it was a moral failure for me as opposed to understanding it was a systemic issue. I wish that I had known that now. That's
so interesting, because, I've been open about the fact that I left that big law firm practice of law, and I left like with my head, sort of slunk out hiding, and was embarrassed that I couldn't make it work.
100%. I never blamed the law firm. I blamed myself. And I think that is, again, why I really love the work that you're doing, because you're helping people understand that this is not you. It is, that saying, well, it's not you, it's me when you're trying to break up with someone. Well, it's not you, it's me, but actually it's really freaking you.
But let's double down here. Okay, so you leave the big law firm job, you go to another position as an attorney, and then something happened after that. When did you finally exit the legal community, and how many kids did you have?
Well, at the time that I finally said, okay, I have to start my own firm, which I did. And I want to just say that to the women out there, because we're seeing a lot of forced entrepreneurship right now because of what's happened to women in the workforce over the pandemic. And I will say that entrepreneurship, people, say it like it's the best thing in the world, but actually you become a case of the 1099. You lose your benefits, you lose access to a 401k. So I would say that it's not always cupcakes and rainbows when you become an entrepreneur, but I did not believe I had a way to make it work in the traditional workforce. And so instead of asking my husband to help me make it work, which is what I would have done now, and that's what fair play is about, again, I blame myself. And so I was forced out. I left that financial services firm and I started my own consultancy right after my second son was born.
And when in this timeline did your project of fair play come about, and tell us about it?
Well, fair play, as you said, came after the blueberries breakdown. So that was in 2011. It's been a while now. But what I started to see in 2011 when I was forced out of the traditional workforce, and it didn't make my life any easier to go to flexibility, I realized something was wrong. When I realized that I was a statistic, that I was holding 2/3 or more of what it takes to run a home and family, and the flexibility in my workforce just made it easier for me to take on unpaid labor that I would get no quote-unquote credit for. God forbid, my partner left me. I realized that this was not sustainable. And from there, I decided to either do one of two things. One, I was going to do what my friend told me was her solution to righting the wrong of unpaid labor in her home, which she said was 3 words: court-ordered custody. So I could have done that. But instead, I decided to become my own client and use all those years of organizational management training and my legal governance training and start to ask the most important question I've ever asked in the past 10 years. And that is, what if we started to treat our homes as our most important organizations?
So tell us the 4 rules of fair play.
Absolutely. Well, the 4 rules of fair play, one is all time is created equal. That is the basis of fair play. And what that means is that in every single thing I did, the main aha moment I had was that I could not even convince women to want to right the imbalance of their homes because we had been convinced since we were born that our time is worthless.
Is it that it's worthless, Eve, or is it that if you're not making money or making the most money, it's not as valuable?
Well, I think even when I saw women who were making more than their partners, they were still holding most of the unpaid labor in their home.
Well, we had a guest recently who said the exact same thing in her house.
Yeah, and we know that's the statistic. So what was happening was I started to see patterns that, and this goes with Rule 1 and Rule 2, which has to do with both of these rules about valuing your time, setting boundaries. And what it has to do with is the fact that we guard men's time as if it's finite, like diamonds. We treat women's time as if it's infinite, like sand. We say to us since birth that breastfeeding is free when it's actually an 1,800-hour-a-year job. We say to women, if you enter this profession, salaries will automatically come down. So your time is worth a lot less. But the saddest thing to me, the hardest thing for me, was hearing women and what they said to themselves to convince themselves that that it was okay with the inequities in their own homes.
And I just have to ask, I love what the second rule says: reclaim your right to be interesting. What does that mean?
Yes. Well, if you're the one always picking up the kids from school, ordering the free COVID test, sitting in a bathtub and working while your partner claims space, as one woman said to me, she lost her right to be interesting. And I thought that was really provocative. What does it mean to be interested in your own life? Well, I'll tell you. What it means is you need space.
You're listening to The Balance Dilemma. We're speaking with author Eve Rodsky about her book, Fair Play and Finding Your Unicorn Space. Eve, before we took our break, you were talking about your second rule, reclaim your right to be interesting, which kind of leads into the book that you have just coming out called Finding Your Unicorn Space. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, it was really hard for me to hear women say, well, I don't even know what I would do with found time if I had it. There's a passion gap in my life. And what I was realizing people were saying to me, especially women, were that I do not believe I have a permission to be unavailable for my role. And so then I would ask women, when was the last time that the most important thing you did that day was outside your roles as a parent, partner, and or professional? And the answer was often, I can't think of a day where the most important thing I did was outside of those roles. And that's what this is about, that we deserve the space, the mental and physical space to be interested in our own lives. That's the only boundary that we need right now. I don't care about a walk around the block or a drink with a friend. I want women to believe that they have the permission to be interested in their own lives.
You know, and Eve, this is so true. Maura and I have discussed when you listen to advice segments that oftentimes men give on how to structure your life and how to maximize time, they are utterly impractical for women to do.
Correct.
They're creating, I don't answer emails or answer the phone until 12 noon. Well, what are you going to do when they forgot their lunch and somebody's calling from school? It implies...
I read and I meditate before.
Exactly. It implies that they have this other person in their life who's being the lead parent. And it makes women have this, passion gap. What a word. So your book... Tell us about unicorns and creativity. What are you saying to women that they should lean into here?
Well, I think what we have to realize is that we deserve the permission to have uninterrupted attention for things that we love. On average, there was a time use study that showed women were interrupted every 3 minutes and 42 seconds in the pandemic. And so, for men, you'll often hear it called the flow state or deep work. And I'm not saying that those are bad things. I love those things. But if you just say, well, you deserve time for the flow state or deep work, like you said, that's advice that's not practical for women when we're being interrupted every 3 minutes and 42 seconds. We have to understand why. And then we have to push back and say, okay, well, this is a combination of people not wanting me to be unavailable because my time is infinite. It's also a combination of guilt and shame that has come and conditioned me to do what you want me to do. And it's also a combination of women being told we can't use our voice to ask for what we need.
And I think your third and fourth rules for fair play, the third one being start where you are now, and the fourth being establish your values and standards. These are how you direct women to get back on track with finding their creative process and their passion and having the permission to be unavailable, correct?
Absolutely. I think you can't expect somebody to just jump into, as we said earlier, flow state or deep work if you don't even know what you're curious about anymore. I had one friend when I said, just start where you are now. I just want to know about one thing you're curious about. And she looked at me, she's like, I guess the only thing I'm curious about is scrolling my friend's Venmo transactions. And so I said, it's not that type of curiosity. And so that's why Rule 4 is so important, because if you're stuck, the best place to do is to return to your values. And I don't mean the values that society has given us, like family values or obligation and duty. I mean the values that you can, as we started with this conversation, actually, you brought me right around, you're great interviewers, because we started this conversation where you asked me what my values were, and I was able to tell you that justice has always been a value in my life. And so returning to that, I didn't know it would turn out that I'd be writing 2 books to women, but I did know that at some point, if justice informed my life, I'd probably be happy or moving towards, more meaning as opposed to that passion gap we talked about.
So you've turned fair play into a game with cards that you and your spouse or partner allocate. And someone can read the book and find out, but how do you get your partner to buy in? And did your husband join immediately?
Well, it's funny because my husband, when all of his friends say, how did you get so good at all the unpaid labor in your house? He's great at school forums, I will tell you that. He just said, well, you just have to have your wife write a book about you and portray you in a terrible light.
You did say he's not a Neanderthal.
Yeah, but I think what happened was that he realized, and when we this was something that I beta tested for years. This doesn't come out of nowhere. This comes out of the idea of organizational management and end of bias interventions, which understands that structured decision making is the way out of decision fatigue. And so what I started to realize was that when men understood systems, because they do it at work, they understand the directly responsible individual, they understand an ownership mindset, that they want someone to work for them. I'd say to men, hey, if I hired you someone and they came into your office today and said, hey, what should I be doing today? I'll just wait here till you tell me what to do. You wouldn't probably have that person on your team much longer. And so I think what happened really, really early was a lot of men became very enamored with fair play because they realized I wasn't telling them what to do. I was giving them structured decision making so that their lives wouldn't be, a chaotic, overwhelming mess. Did
this path that you went on, which became your passion and your job, so to speak, this business of fair play, did this help your relationship with your husband? Do you think it made it better in the household, that you were happier employing these skills?
Yes, absolutely. I don't know what happened, but somehow in the past 10 years, people have believed that good relationships means intensive togetherness. I kept interviewing people for fair play in Costco, and I'd ask, say a hetero cisgender couple, why are you here together? Why are you both grocery shopping? You're just going to forget the diapers, blame each other, and then bring home an expensive buffalo wing tray. Like, do something else with your time. And so I think the more Seth and I realized that the more we were unavailable to each other, because we were building our own identities, the more happy we were as a unit, ironically.
Interesting.
Do you have any idea of the measure of success for those who have played or used your game?
Yes. Well, I would say that we have thousands and thousands of couples in our CRM. We actually followed 75 for a documentary. And now we're getting peer-reviewed data. But all I can say is from what we see, anecdotally from probably the biggest longitudinal study of unpaid labor in the U.S. and in 17 countries, and that is structured decision-making like fair play. The systematic understanding of who's doing what before you do it is very transformative. It's life-changing for many, many couples.
Does it actually shift or change the concept of the lead parent? I mean, in playing, with fair play, you end up with someone who is responsible for different things. But is there one person who still has to be the overarching lead parent?
Absolutely not. And that's the beauty of it. Because Seth will say to me, I'm lead parent on dishes, meals, Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and school forms. But then I can be lead parent on dishes the other 2 days, plus, meals on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The flexibility it gives you is that you're trading in assumptions for structured decision-making. What I mean by that is one man said to me, my home before fair play was that we would wait to decide who's taking the dog out, right, when it's about to take a piss on the rug. And he said, now my life is that, but the opposite. And that's what I'm hoping for people. Whatever that is, I want to gift you the opposite.
Do you find that women have trouble letting go of what I guess one would call the gatekeeping? Yes,
100%. And I think that was the hardest one for me, was understanding that I really took pride in this unpaid labor.
You're listening to The Balanced Dilemma. We're speaking with Eve Rodsky. Eve, can you tell us what you learned from speaking to experts about multitasking brains of men and women?
Well, the most important thing I learned was that there is no gender difference in multitasking. Nobody's wired better for caregiving. Instead, what this one neuroscientist said to me that changed my life was, imagine, Eve, that we men could convince you, women, that you're better at wiping asses and doing dishes. How great for my career and my tenure. That day, actually, I cried in his office, but it also changed my life.
Lisa Belkin was one of my favorites early on. She wrote Life's Work, Confessions of an Unbalanced Mom, and she touched upon a lot of the research that has become so prevalent now. But she did mention one study that came to the conclusion, a GW Law professor, Chan, said that she found that unless the inequity at home is addressed, women will never be able to achieve full parity. And it's brought home by the statistics you've mentioned, and it's true. That's how it is. Unless we get the home front on track, we are not going to be able to achieve everything, the 2025 goals that we have laid out and everything else. I just was curious. I asked you about your relationship with your husband. How about your husband's relationship with your children? How did that change after you went through this metamorphosis and started employing these fair play skills?
Well, I think this is why Seth allowed me to write about him, as he jokes, in such an unfair, in a unflattering light, because his relationship was completely transformed for my kids. And so many men that I spoke to said that was the biggest aha moment for them, that instead of being scared of having to make school lunches or being the one who's called when a kid is sick, one man said to me, I never thought I would be the one answering the school because I thought I was too busy. But the times I've been the most happiest and the most connected with my kids are when I've had to pick them up from school early to take them to the pediatrician's office. This movement is to value that care, to understand that's our humanity. An hour in the pediatrician's office has to become as valuable to this society as an hour in the boardroom.
Eve, some of it obviously is within the couple, but some of it is a problem in society where schools default to calling mom. Other places look to mom to take care of the volunteer work for the PTA. How does that get changed?
by starting in the home. I will say that I think we can do many different things. We can do change for ourselves because we can't change society, but it does help when you have someone say to me, don't default to my wife, call me. Yes, there's emotional labor when you're first. When you're a first actor in culture change, it's going to be hard for you, but it's worth it. I will say the other thing that we're doing, of course, is we're fighting on a federal and state level now for the social safety net that has never been in America. And that's obviously universal child care, paid leave, and long-term care. We need those things to start righting the wrong of the imbalance of women being the social safety net of this country.
Do the issues of fair play come into play when it is the father who stays home with them?
Absolutely, because unpaid labor is not valued.
But do you find men complaining the same way? I mean, we hear stories of where the woman is the breadwinner and there's still a full-time nanny at home for to take care of the children and somebody to clean the house, whereas it's not necessarily the case if the woman is home.
Well, that is true. We know that of all the family structures, stay-at-home dads have the most leisure time. But I will say that what I've heard, I have a very, very large network of stay-at-home fathers who say to me that they also believe that because of the assumptions of society that women do everything, that they do feel isolated. They do feel like they don't have the communities and the support. And so I don't want that for anybody, because at the end of the day, we have to start valuing unpaid labor so that men will do it, so that any family structure can benefit from this, including LGBTQIA couples who tell me, people ask them, who are the women and who are the men in your relationship? So instead of learning from family structures that don't look heteronormative, we're trying to fit them into these heteronormative boxes. So it's really time to blow up all of these old assumptions.
One question we ask our guests is involving imposter syndrome and feeling like a fraud. And that question seems appropriate where a woman is working in a traditional setting. You have now morphed into this entrepreneurial business of sorts. How has your feeling about yourself been since you have gone into this new position where you're advocating for policy changes and bringing to light things of the home? Do you feel as strong and as you did as a working attorney?
Well, as you said earlier, I think when I left with my tail between my legs saying I couldn't cut it in a traditional law firm, I had a ton of imposter syndrome. But then if I look back now, I realized it was mostly bias. My imposter syndrome did not start when I first got in there, when I had my I can do anything attitude. It started slowly as a death by 1,000 cuts, where I started to get the crappy assignment in the basement where my male colleagues were getting to fly with the partner on the airplane. And so that is what I think imposter syndrome is. I think it's a death by 1,000 cuts of bias, and plus not realizing it's systemic so that we blame ourselves.
So you and your husband both work. Do you believe that you can have a two-parent family where both parents have an inflexible, away-from-home career at the same time? I mean, your career became more flexible. I don't know about your husband's. Does that work?
I do. And I of course, I think the old paradigm has been, well, this can only work if a woman replaces a woman. And so we saw white feminism for 10 years basically saying, well, if you're so overwhelmed, just get help. The problem with that paradigm is that that's assuming that women will raise in the workforce, white women, based on the undervalued labor of domestic workers. So
I will also say there are things you need a parent for.
100%. And that's what's interesting about fair play. Of the 100 cards, which is the metaphor, there are 100 cards that make up your domestic family structure, home life. About 50 of those cards consistently were told to me in 17 countries were outsourceable, unoutsourceable. As much as you love Alexia, she's not deciding whether your child's adenoids are being taken out. I will say that, I do believe that you can be in two high ambition careers, but I do think it takes a ton of structured decision making. And again, and not assumptions. And that's really ultimately what fair play is. It's a system so that you know what has to get done before it gets done.
So we've had this pandemic, and we've had so many women, almost 2 million women have left the workforce. I think as of January, 1.8 million are still out of the workforce. And we also have a shift to more acceptability of work for home, which years ago was completely unacceptable. Is that good or bad for women?
Well, it's a good question. I don't think we know yet. I know everyone's really afraid of the proximity bias.
Sorry, what's the proximity bias?
Oh, a proximity bias is what a lot of consultants and leaders are afraid of, which is that the people who go to the office who don't use the work from home structure will get better assignments and will get promoted faster. And we know that the two populations that like work from home are mothers, and Black employees and mothers are enjoying and affording some more grace for the microaggressions and the bias by having a work from home structure. And so it would really pain me if that proximity bias is not addressed. I do not think it has to be that way, but again, it's going to take some real structured decision making and intention on behalf of the corporations to ensure that people are being promoted in a fair and equitable way, not depending on who they see in front of them in an office.
Now, we didn't ask your children, boys, girls, what are they?
We have a 13-year-old son, a 10-year-old son, and a 5-year-old daughter. But what I will say about those ages is that it's been really fun to watch my kids be part of the fair play system, to understand that this is a family structure that includes them. And so my son, Zach, he holds the dishes card, and Ben holds the laundry card, and it's been really fun to watch them, hold the ownership of the full task, because it's been a learning experience for them for sure.
So I want to take this opportunity to let our listeners know that they can find us on the web at thebalancedilemma.com, where they can listen to old episodes and sign up for our newsletter, find show announcements, show notes, resources, and further reading. You also can find us on social media at The Balanced Dilemma Podcast on Facebook and LinkedIn. And podcast episodes are also available for listening on Apple iTunes and Google and Spotify. Maura?
Eve, we always ask this of our guests. Can you have it all and all at the same time?
Well, if you asked me at 21, I would have said yes. If you asked me at 31, I would have said that all my dreams were dead. And now at 45, I do believe that we can have it all if it's defined in new ways. And the new ways are, values. Our values coming first, our humanity coming first, and understanding that we don't have to do it all to have it all.
You're kind of touching upon something that Maura and I have been hearing a lot lately, which is periodizing your life, doing certain things at certain times and other things at others. Do you think that, in light of everything we discussed today and fair play, that it might be advisable to periodize your life and do certain things at different times?
Look, we all have seasons, and sometimes it's winter, sometimes it's spring. My favorite is fall, but I will say that do not give up and never ever think it was too late.
Eve Rodsky, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. I'm Maura Carlin.
Thank you so much.
And I'm Christie Derrico.